What?
What did I just say?
Dessert? I don't
Never
know.
get your nose in that phone all the time.
All right. I'm sorry, okay? It's just that I posted something earlier and I wanted to see how many likes I got and
Yada, yada, yada.
but you're right. I should set it aside.
Yeah.
I sometimes I just feel like I'm addicted to this thing, you know?
16 Hope says the same thing.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sarah, this is Dan, and we're from Trails Momentum. We're here to talk to you today about tech addiction. So a good place to start is even understanding what that is. How do you define technology addiction today? What does it look like? How does it show up with us as adults and maybe in our young adults today? What do you know about it, Dan?
So when I hear that, I think of a couple things. So I think there's two ways to define it, and there's a whole continuum of what tech addiction looks like, and so we can talk about the social aspect, and we can talk about the neurological aspect. And so the social aspect is more that kind of catalyst affects more the social media stuff.
Okay.
So this is where kids and adults are constantly looking for likes on their phone.
Yeah.
They're constantly trying to connect with other people. And so they end up creating this community, and they feel like they belong someplace. And they feel like they're in a relationship when actually they're not. When actually they can create themselves to be anybody and anything. It doesn't have to be authentic. And it's kind of pseudo relationships, and it helps them to feel like these particular needs in their lives are being met when they're actually not. It gives a real false sense that I belong someplace, because most people really want to belong, right?
Right,
Especially
sure.
you're talking about young adults and adolescents, and so it gives them a real false sense of belonging. At the same time, they're not having a chance to really practice social skills. How do I be in a relationship? How do I end up connecting with people? And so there's this huge deficit, because they're being fooled, like I'm in a relationship.
Right.
When they're actually not. And then they go out into the real world, and if they become really awkward, uncomfortable, they're like, okay, so I'll just go back.
Because they can't they can't cover up stuff that they would cover up in an online relationship, and they can't have a do-over.
Right.
Like the spontaneous interactions that we have in the real world don't really happen online.
Right.
So
right.
those relationships really aren't good practice for face-to-face relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, some of the studies are showing now that the level of empathy in both adolescents and young adults is beginning to lower.
Right, and that's partly also because of the anonymity factor too, right? You don't have to care about people online because they don't really know who you really are,
Right.
and there's no real accountability piece there.
Right.
And so you could just travel from site to site, relationship to relationship, and act aggressively if you want.
Right.
And there's really no repercussions. So it's really reinforcing kind of our most negative behaviors.
Yeah.
Our most primal, ego-driven, id-driven stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
So, and I kind of want to switch then over to the gaming piece.
Yeah.
So, so there's the social, and that can happen in gaming too, because you can do games together remotely.
Right.
You can be taking on a game with somebody in England while you're living
Right.
in the States. An addiction equals this. It is when you have a compulsive behavior with ongoing negative effects, consequences, and you don't stop.
And the behavior is interrupting your other normal daily life, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an interruption to your normal functioning too,
Right.
right? So negative effects, and that use interrupts what you
Right.
should normally be doing.
Right, and
yeah.
that's some of the negative consequences is
Right.
when you're not functioning at a level that you normally would because you're in front of a screen. So that becomes a hard line. I mean, a fine line, hard to really define, because sometimes gaming is gaming.
Right.
Gaming is
This is
fun.
fun.
It's like going and playing golf. I
Right.
mean, it's just there is a pleasure to it, and there could be a passion around it.
Right.
But actually, what they're finding neurologically is that there is a line that gets crossed where folks begin to depend on a particular feeling that's caused by dopamine.
Yeah, right.
And so when gamers get to a place where that level of dopamine becomes what is normal for them, then it becomes much more of an addiction versus
Right.
just a passion.
Right.
And there is a difference.
And they have to keep doing the thing that drives that dopamine
Right.
release.
Right.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that, like with gambling addicts, what MRIs are showing is that gamers are, when they fail, they have as much of a dopamine increase as if they succeed.
Oh.
So there is no negative
Interesting.
consequences.
Right.
Say, I'm tired of,
Yeah. They don't want to quit.
Right.
Because that dopamine is still
Right.
getting released.
I'm losing,
Yeah.
okay, I'm losing, all right.
Right.
So there's this.
So it's similar to like a gambling addiction in that
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
And the MRI showed that they looked very, very similar.
Okay.
And MRIs are showing that the dopamine increase comes in the same way, but at a very lower level than somebody who's on cocaine.
Wow.
So there's this intricate kind of network in our brains that cause different things to show up, like dopamine or epinephrine, or any of those things.
Right.
And so when it becomes a particular pattern, it does take on a quality where the brain is naturally going to begin to look to do things that helps it to feel like a normal, like the new normal that it's attained.
Right. So that's kind of scary because there's more of it now, right?
Right.
Like technology addiction is really common.
Anybody who has a screen has the potential of it becoming a problem.
Sure.
And everybody who has a screen has the potential of it becoming a very positive, supportive, empowering thing in their lives, right? And so it's hard, you can't, like with alcohol or a drug, you're like, I know what's going to happen.
Right.
I drink too much, I feel this way.
Right.
Whereas on the screen, there isn't anything to help determine whether this is necessarily going to take me down the wrong road.
So what can we do? Like how can families, how can young adults who are recognizing that they're struggling with this, how can they start to acknowledge it and then move forward from it in a positive way? And what are some things we can do, like at Trails Momentum, what are we doing to help address this issue?
I think the answer to it, I don't think there is an easy answer or a one answer deal.
Okay.
I think that it's multi-leveled. And I think that's part of what makes it so complicated is it's really hard to know when that line's been crossed until it really gets severe.
Okay.
And so I think education and awareness is really important.
Right.
I think being able to tease out that whole DSM definition of when it becomes an addiction is when there's negative consequences and it doesn't stop. That doesn't make someone stop. And so somehow we got to educate the population around it.
Okay.
Second is I think when families can, they need to be really involved in the technology and screens in their household as early on as they can be. So I think that's again, it's a hard answer. It's a hard answer. But I think some of the things that we do at Momentum is first of all, it's really basic stuff. Is that it stops.
Right.
When they come to us, we stop that train.
Right.
But we replace it with something. And I think that's part of the key is that when something's taken away, you got to replace it with something.
Right.
And the thing that we naturally replace it with is they're out in nature right off the bat.
Right.
Their first day, they're outside.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so they're away from the distractions and all the pressure that comes from social media and electronics and screens. And they're being introduced by skilled people to a whole different environment that does a lot of the same thing for their brain
Right.
that gaming or technology does.
Right.
And they're helped to be made aware of it. Like, folks, the field instructors are constantly teaching them and helping them to be aware of what's happening for them out in the middle of it.
Right. They're thinking through that new experience and how it's kind of helping to replace that old, maybe less healthy experience.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Most of the time, the students are not going to go back and be tech-free.
No,
I mean, I
it's
don't know
not.
if you-
It's not realistic for
Right.
most of them. Yeah.
It's like somebody who struggles with food addiction, you've got to eat, right?
Right. Right.
And so the way we are as a society is you basically have to have that. And so being able to help them to be able to see how it works for them and how it doesn't work for them is really
Right.
important.
Right.
At the same time, helping them become aware of, for them to know the internal signals that go off when it moves more into that dangerous zone.
Right.
Where it begins to take over their life and they don't feel like they have a choice about it anymore.
So helping them recognize that pattern and then have a plan in place for
Right.
how they can maybe address that before it goes too far
Right.
again.
Yep.
So today we've had a chance to talk with you a little bit about technology addiction. We've talked about what it looks like, how it shows up in young adults today, and what we can do at Trails Momentum to help young adults address their behaviors and move forward in a more positive direction. Please feel free to reach out to us. We hope to hear from you soon.